As I have, other than the Menti, on the Menti, you will see that I have created a tiny URL, tinyurl.com/Modelware Systems. On that Google Drive is the presentation. So it's the deck. We've come to the end of the metadata series. And there's also a Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to take you through today, and I'd be interested in getting you to do it yourself whilst I'm doing it, just so that you can have an understanding of where you believe you are, or what you believe the common companies are within your industry or your customers, and we can maybe share some results at the end. I'd love to see how you guys have rated this situation. This workbook, actually, before I go too far, this workbook comes from some analysis of the data that has been set up by the dataleaders.org, and they are the guys who put the data manifesto together. And there's a really nice root cause analysis that I've been working with for quite some time, just trying to get an understanding of how metadata is involved in the root cause analysis. So that's what part of the discussion is going to be on today. All right, so if you guys have had a chance to download it, that would be great. But the first thing I wanted to do was, this is a question that we've seen that I wanted to get an understanding from you all in terms of where you sit with your understanding of metadata. So I hope you guys have logged on to menti.com, and we're about to, I think that's Debbie there already. We're about to start with a question. Just love to get your answers on that and see what everyone feels. Okay, so your phone, what is metadata? Okay, so what is and it's one of those complex DMBOK questions, and it looks to, okay, great. So it's certainly one that has the results and things like that. It's one that's always, whenever people ask me and I try to provide a simple answer, we say it's data about data. And I think that certainly from my understanding now, that answer is a little bit too simple, not enough for business people to understand. And what you will notice that all of these are correct. Metadata is also data, and in some cases it is the data. But the one that's the more complete definition is this scenario where it describes data, it sets the business context, and it also describes the relationship between data. And we spoke last week about the unified data model and elements like that. So be careful of that when you do write your CDP exam. Be careful not to jump at the first one, or the data about data, but it looks like you guys have got most of it right anyway. Excellent. So let's go now in terms of into the presentation, and let's progress through that one. All right, so we're talking about understanding data. This is metadata for data executives, and of course it's all about costs and profits and where's the focus. And so how do we understand what the problem is that we're focusing on? And I just wanted to go past that. So just to set the context in terms of metadata and the awareness. What is metadata? We've gone through that, but what I wanted to add to that is that it's the primary means for capturing and manage organizational knowledge. Okay, so basically all of the knowledge management, all of the data that goes from tacit to explicit, that is metadata. And it's also there to help us manage risk by meeting compliance and minimizing risk exposure. So remember, we're talking to the execs at the moment. So if we are to give them justification and make them aware about how important this is, we need to be able to relate to things that they are challenged by and things that they have to deal with. Okay, so why do we use metadata and what are the benefits? Certainly about increasing confidence in data. It's about increasing the value of information, and that is quite important. So especially our critical information. So we spend ages in that doing master data or BI or whatever it is, and we tend to forget about the metadata that's going to set the context for whichever report we run, whichever master data we collect. Metadata helps us define the context and get the meaning right and improve the communication. And with good metadata, we're going to improve our operational efficiency. We're going to stop the misuse of data. So these days, with all the data privacy, that's really important. It's going to help us protect sensitive information, reduce the data-oriented research time. And I'm sure I've shared this with you about the story of one organization that I was involved with, and they wanted to, well, they didn't want to, but when we had one of these governance councils, one person admitted to spending 3 months trying to understand a data set and suffer in the process suffering embarrassment about misusing the data, drawing the wrong conclusions, and presenting graphs that didn't really help and were incorrect. They presented it all, thought it was great, and then the original person that shared the data said, "No, you got the context wrong." So that was 3 months of really expensive resources and a level of embarrassment. So we certainly don't want any of you guys to suffer from that. I'm sure you won't, but be careful. Then the other side of it is the accurate impact analysis. So this is all about the relationships and the context. And so we need to be able to say, if I change this, what else changes? And last week we had a fantastic discussion in the data management professionals in terms of building a meta model, unifying it. And I see that even able to encourage Mark Nolte to attempt that, to actually start building the metadata with all the relationships and understanding how to navigate through that thing. So I don't know how many others got that desire to build a meta model. It's certainly something that I've enjoyed doing, and I really like paying attention to that metadata. Improving time to market by reducing the software development cycle. And the better your metadata is, for example, just a simple thing. Paul Krobler and I are really involved with a whole reporting data warehouse migration, and we sit with thousands of reports, and thousands is probably an exaggeration. We sit with a lot of reports, a lot of data moving between people. We have no idea what those reports are for, and we're constantly trying to build a reporting architecture for our warehouse, but we don't fully understand why people are using data. We get the sense that every single SSRS report that we've used is a data dump. ClickView looks very similar to that. There are a couple of dashboards that are interesting, but in general, it's all about allowing people to extract data from the database. So we would really benefit by having up-to-date and strong metadata. Reduce the training costs. So whenever we see data, we've got context, history, and origin, and then of course supporting regulatory compliance. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that, and you're seeing that with the data privacy programs. So from an exec point of view, what do they need to know? Okay, so metadata is foundational to data management. It's not something we add at the end. It's something that we've got to build all the way through. And it's quite a surprise to a lot of execs that is important. It's almost like when I suggest you build your BI reports in the beginning of the project, that you're building the application and not at the end. because it's constantly showing you an understanding of how your data is hanging together and the quality of the data that you have. There's nothing better than having a report that doesn't balance, to get a wake up in terms of, oh shucks, I've either got a data quality challenge or I've got a data model that's not working. But in saying that, it's not an end, it's just a means. We capture the data, the knowledge, we go from tacit to explicit, we minimize the risk, and we enable the value of the assets that we're dealing with. Okay, so it's all about enablement and helping people understand and communicate. The costs, in terms of, there are big costs in terms operationally and time, that if we have that available to them, it's so much easier. And we also, just the project that I'm currently with, there's a group of people that are almost from a film school, and just about every opportunity they get, they build a video, and that becomes the training. And these guys are quite professional, and it's really amazing to see how that enables the use of the system and just everything around it. And metadata is data, and it does have a life cycle. So everything you do with data, you need to do with metadata. Really nice diagrams that we had on the previous sessions, where we showed exactly what needs to be done at the different stages of metadata lifecycle. And then the other aspect that we talk about is and I'm sure you guys have seen that in terms of big data and data lakes, and over the last 2-3 years, how the data cataloging, the metadata, the data description, data discovery has been critical to ensure that data lakes don't become like shared folders and become data swamps, but they're accessible and we can understand the data we have. So just to be able to summarize what metadata is. Now, this is something that I got reminded about. It is in the DMBOK. It's also in the Navigating the Labyrinth from Laura Sebastian Coleman. And they talk about what is the major problem that we all face as data management professionals. Now, so if you were really, and this was research that was done by, it was actually done by an Australian company, but it was, yeah, so it was Dr. Nina Evans on the University of South Australia and James Price. They did a lot of this work in terms of interviewing thousands of people, different companies, and what they were struggling with in terms of that. And this is the end result. The problem is that our information assets are not properly managed. And certainly the outputs or the results of that is that we have this downgrade of customer experience. We have an organization alacrity, which it's a big word, or it's actually a small word, but it means the lack of flexibility and one's ability to respond to changes. So without proper impact analysis, without proper definitions, without proper context, the organization battles to respond. Decreased revenue, increased costs, productivity down, competitive edge down, and then we have our risks that are increasing. Now, this what struck me when I was going through this with someone who's developed a digital twin, and they're bringing an electronic or a digital twin version of the DMBOK that has got, it's all about the metadata. Everything that's been done, all the processes, all the procedures are coming out of the DMBOK and going into a metadata database, so that we can all interpret and understand it and start to collect the data. And when I was looking through this root cause analysis, is there anyone who's not sure on how to read a fishbone diagram? Would anyone just like some background in terms of how to read it and how to understand it?
I think it'll be useful if you go through that, yeah.
Okay. Now, if you look at, these are the top categories of the fishbone analysis. If you go and do the research on what a fishbone analysis points out, some people have got a standard set of categories that you should look at any problem. So when you want to analyze a problem, what you're trying to do is get to the root of all of these problems. And there is the outcome and the problem that we have with data management is that our information assets are not managed properly. So these are all the high-level contributing factors, and then you've got smaller elements that work along the chain that are related to that category. Now, in a true root cause analysis or fishbone diagram, what we say is that the ones that are at the bottom and pushing up, they are the ones that are the biggest issues, and then the ones at the top are pushing down, and they still challenges, but in some cases they can reduce the impact. And then you can actually, if you do a root cause analysis you can actually have arrows going both directions, and you have a similar type of scenario. So lack of accountability, if it's pushing to the left, it's increasing the problem, and then if you have others that push to the right, that in some cases reduce the impact of it. So that's quite important to use and be comfortable with. So whenever you're looking at problems, be they data quality problems, that's where this diagram really comes to fruition. So for example, in a data quality problem, you'll have your different dimensions, and then you'll have causes that are leading to the different dimensions. For example, bad data modeling or applications that are not supporting it, and then we've got integration that's causing problems and we're not doing the appropriate checks. But it's a really nice visual to be able to say, these are all the factors that have been considered, and they did a massive research and they're still doing it, and saying these are the core elements that you need to pay attention to. So when I looked at this and looked at the idea of explaining to executives as to what's going wrong, I find it quite powerful. Now, especially if you could take out the noise here, you're looking at what are the core elements: lack of leadership, lack of awareness, lack of governance, difficulty in justifying why we need data management, and inappropriate or ineffective instruments. So you can basically sum up the reason why information assets are not managed properly by those 5 categories. And yeah, Veronica's quite right. Is that saying, the fish rots from the head. And so there's our core issue, and these are the ones that are contributing. They have contributing elements within that. Thanks for that, Veronica. Would you like to share anything, Veronica, on that? No comments.
Sorry, I wasn't on mute.
Okay.
I guess you covered it, so it's fine.
All right.
It's just anyone that's doing data quality, it's important to know that.
Yeah. So if you're going to do the data quality exam, you better know how to piece these things together and work out what is causing the problem at the end of the day. And these are typically the impacts. This is something that's not part of that Ishikari, I think it is, diagram, is the impact on the Ishikawa. Sorry. Okay. These are the impacts. Okay, and you can find it on dataleaders.org. A lot of people have brought out that manifesto, but I actually think this is more important than the manifesto in explaining to executives what goes wrong and what's possibly going wrong within their organization. Anyone like to comment on that? How many of you have signed the manifesto and are great believers in it? But have you seen this diagram that they published alongside it?
Yes, I have, but only because you told me about it the other day.
Oh, okay. So you went and had a good look at it. Mark?
Yeah, I've gone as far as plotting the manifesto on a 4x3 sheet of paper and putting it up on the wall outside my cubicle just to get people to stop. And I even had a senior VP sign it.
Oh, okay, nice.
To try and motivate the other leaders to take it seriously. Right?
Yeah. So, I think what I liked about this diagram is almost explaining what the problems are that we are facing. So what's the root cause of the challenges we face with data management? And if you look at a lot of the stuff, if we were to say, if we were to go to an exec and say, okay, this is what we believe the problem is, first of all, we're going to have to collect some data in terms of applying it to ourselves, our organization. And then, very similar to a maturity assessment, one would want this repeated in whatever period that we're talking about, and to be able to present the numbers again. Now, these are some of the challenges that you're going to face in terms of, well, how do we continually measure the lack of accountability, the lack of ownership, and so your metadata, the metadata requirements are going to be important. All right. Paul, is there anything you wanted to say?
No, nothing to add. I'm just appreciating Veronica's other format of the diagram as well.
Yes.
The Ishikawa. Ishikawa, yeah. So I just like the way that they've added even more, just with the colors.
Yeah. And if people look there, that was I was trying to say, between arrows up and down, the bottom and the top, and arrows going left and right. Those have meaning in terms of what they're trying to say. Does that have people had a look at that?
I haven't. First time I saw Fishbone diagrams like the one you have up there from the data leaders, but this one that Veronica's posted, I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So it's helpful to understand how to read that. Okay. Any other comments? So what they're basically saying, or what James Price is saying, is if you can deal with these, if you've got a solution to these problems, these are the set of problems, or the categories of problems that you'll find in most organizations that are battling with information asset management, IAM, and then do you have a solution? So as a consultant, as a whatever it is, do you know how to solve these problems? Now, you'll see in the spreadsheet, you'll start to see some of the elements on how I've mapped that. All right, so I don't know how many of you guys have downloaded the spreadsheet. This is the spreadsheet here that's in action, and for you, if you want to, it's about answering these questions. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got the causes, I've got the cause category, lack of awareness, I've got no tertiary education, and I've got the 5 wives and 2 husbands, the who, why. So for each one of these things, I've described where that challenge fits, and then I've also described the knowledge area within the DM box that addresses that. So for example, typically when you see the who's, you're going to go to organization and role expectation. And whilst a lot of it is data governance, we need to be keeping this data in terms of roles, expectations, and mandates and races. We need to keep it. Metadata needs to support this approach. So metadata's got to back this up. So if I have a RACI diagram, is it available to everyone? Can they find it? Can they determine who's involved with a process whilst they're doing a process? So how do we take that tacit knowledge that we talk about and make it explicit? All right. Then what I've done is I've allocated 4 elements that are for your review and for you to be able to score your organization. Okay, so I'll just hide the scores. That's not important, but it's these 4 elements. So what is the impact of this no tertiary education within your organization? So do you believe that the lack of tertiary education or certification is important? So what is the impact of on-the-job education or no on-the-job education within your organization? And what I was interested in what I recognized in doing some of the things is a lot of the times I'm unable to assess the impact of this within my organization. Okay, who does what? Now that's all about racy definitions within your organizational role expectation. The governance shouldn't know about that. I think it's got a massive impact. I spend lots of time with customers, and there's always this confusion about what the mandates are, what the roles and responsibilities are. Failure to invest in quality, we all know about that. That has a high impact. The probability of that coming out, we don't always know. The effort that it's taken to fix data quality, that's an ongoing thing, and it's high. And then I've got what's called an urgent and important matrix, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But what you can do is just click on each one of those, and you can set your rating from there's no impact to low, medium, high, and then unable to assess. Now, for example, one of the things that I couldn't do with a lot of the customers that I'm involved with is the decrease in customer experience. So that's not within the organization, that is the customers of the organization. What is the improper information asset management? What is the problem with customer experience? I can't always assess that. Is that making sense to you guys? And you basically go through each one of these columns, and you set the value, and then what you can do is when you finished with that, you really just go to each one of these analysis sections. So we've got impact, risk rating, effort, a combined analysis, which means this is a rating of all of them together. And then I've got an urgency, and all you do is you can either do a refresh or you right click on the matrix and you just do a refresh. Okay, so just to take you through one, for example, the lack of equivalent principles and management for that gap. And if I was to say my assessment on that one is low, I can change the low. I can then say, what is the effort to fix that problem? It's very high. And I would say it's urgent, but not important. All right. So I can then go into my impact assessment. And if I refresh that, if I just watch the numbers that I've changed, it's now in leadership and lack of leadership and management. And if I refresh here, I get the change in 16. Okay. And if I refresh them all, then I'll pick up the impacts that they're having all over the place. That makes sense. Are there any questions? So it doesn't take long if you want to just go through that, and just, you don't have to overanalyze it, but just as a high level, what do you think these problems are? So just to explain it, software is seen as a panacea. So a lot of the challenges that we're facing from information asset management is that people believe that tools and technology are going to fix the problem, and data is not as important. So all the new RPA, all of that stuff is, let's go and do all these fancy AI stuff, and we believe we're going to fix the problem with software. What is your license fee? Whatever you want it to be, Mark. You and I, we can come to an agreement. Okay, so then, I mean, there's information tools are not understood, how to use them, lack of accountability, I'm sure you've heard of it, ownership, unclear responsibilities, lack of measurement, so we're not measuring how we're doing from a governance point of view. We don't have it in front of people. In terms of justification, how do we justify metadata? How do we justify data management? There's not a lot of markets that demand it. I need to just, there are some, for example, in regulatory, in the BCBS 239, we spoke about that last week, where they demand a metadata tool, a metadata database of information in terms of risk analysis. So how do we do that? The costs of information asset management are not understood. I don't know how many people have been able to quantify all the costs of information asset management within their organization. The value of data depends on context. Okay, so we constantly talk about monetizing or defining a value of our assets, but a lot of the times it's the context in which that data is used and what it means to the different people in the business. And we're not always able to assess that. So that is purely a metadata thing, okay? So remember, we talk about misuse of data, we talk about data in understanding data. That's where that comes in. Business cases don't create a sense of urgency. We had a great discussion last week in terms of how do we justify metadata. Now, I think a lot of this is about if we can take these structures and be able to justify it according to, apply it to metadata, I think we can go a long way. And then we can describe it to what we need to do from a business case point of view. Any questions on just the driving of that tool? I'll now go into how do we understand and how do we read that. Okay. So what I did do here, and you may have noticed it, is there's a filter that's been applied, and in this case, if I add the final root cause, the problems get so big and they almost distract from the other areas. In terms of that, it's got the highest impact. Okay, so I've just switched this guy off because he's a consolidation of all of those other categories. So you'll notice that I'm not including that. You may want to bring that as a group measure and then drill it down to the individual categories. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so improper information asset management, that one should be coming out. All right, so now that we've got it, let's look at how do we interpret that. You can certainly make use of it. So let's go through some of the analysis. Okay, so we've basically done that, and we've gone through an assessment of the different areas. Now, if we look at the impact, and it's quite fascinating to see, and I'm sure some of you guys have experienced this, but one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest impacts that you have on your business or information asset management is the lack of leadership and management. And I must admit, I went through the columns not really looking at the figures, and when I came back to it, I found this is quite an interesting discussion about the lack of leadership. That's certainly been my experience. Now, the actual causes are quite helpful to be able to collect data so that we can describe why we don't have proactive measurements. And a lot of in these areas look like the change management stuff that we do in our data governance course, where we try to look at how engaged is leadership and management. And that's not an easy number to quantify, and you'll have to use more of a qualitative assessment. And if any of you are interested in terms of how to do that, you can certainly have a group of people that come together and assess after you've done the meetings and what meetings people have attended. You can then look at, you need to keep a register of all the meetings that people attend, and then you can look at what was their engagement, and you can have a more softer version of, are they getting involved with the debate? Are they controlling everything? What sort of engagement do they have? So quite a helpful thing. There's a lady called Christine Ayotis that does it, and she's taught me a lot in terms of trying to quantify leadership and management. Lack of awareness, I must admit, I think I got wrong. It's right down at the bottom in terms of the impact. I think it's a lot higher than that. Is there anyone that agrees with me? I mean, people not understanding the importance of metadata, I think, is one of the core elements that you need to get across to your organization.
Yeah. I'd like to add something there, Howard. So when we onboarded Informatica to establish and create a data lake at MultiChoice, we found that people in leadership didn't really have the concept of metadata, because they are high up, and metadata is really in the wiring of the business entities.
Yeah.
And they couldn't connect to what we were saying because it was really, a level where they actually didn't go to. And I think that was the biggest challenge for us.
Yeah.
To get buy-in from them, because it's almost like the schism is just too wide between where metadata management sits versus where they're sitting.
Yeah, agreed. And so there's a bit of a challenge there, because do we attribute that to lack of leadership, or do we attribute it to lack of awareness? And it's just because in a way we can't simply explain metadata to them and explain the impact on bad metadata. We may perceive it as lack of leadership, but it may actually be lack of awareness.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And yeah, so there are the challenges there to be able to get that right categorization of the issue you're dealing with. But certainly I found when I basically had 2 or 3 changes of our stakeholders, and especially the core stakeholders, the sponsors and things like that, and when they change, the new person comes in and it's like a clean broom, and they clean everything out and we start again. And that can be one of the more depressing things, especially when you look at the maturity analysis assessment at the end of that. You've almost gone back and reset it, and everything you built becomes problematic. All right, so that's the impact. The risk rating, and this is a risk rating. This is a calculation that risk auditors do, which is actually the impact multiplied by the probability. And that's where you're seeing the numbers are a little bit higher. And the interesting one that I found there is that my lack of business governance was not as high as my inability to onboard and get the leadership involved, difficult to justify, inappropriate use of instruments, and then again, lack of awareness. So I found that quite interesting, and it's actually quite a nice readiness assessment that you can use. And that may not be the same as a maturity assessment, because we must admit that talking to the execs and asking them to do a full-blown maturity assessment on metadata is probably, you're not going to get the success that you're looking for. So having something like this fishbone diagram and this cause, problem, and solution scenario, I find that it's a lot easier to explain and communicate with our business. Okay, then when we look at the effort, we then talk about what is going to be the effort to fix this problem, because I'm sure you guys all know that you do these fancy assessments, and that's all fair and well, but now what do I do with it? What is my action plan? And before you can define an action plan and a roadmap, one of the things that you want to assess is this concept of what is the effort going to be what is the effort required to fix this problem? So these are some of the areas that you will need to define, and certainly I believe those ones will be different for each customer. Is it difficulty in justifying why you're there? Is it due to lack of governance, lack of leadership? Where is your effort, and what is it going to take to fix the problem? Lack of leadership could be quite hard, other than sort of spending time with the execs and explaining, similar to what Mark does there in terms of putting the data manifesto down and getting VPs to sign it. That's sort of how you get the right people involved. Okay, then what I did was I put together a combined analysis to actually show everything on one page. And what was interesting is when we start to see multiple reds. Okay, so notice the multiple reds coming out here in terms of inappropriate and ineffective instruments. So that is one of the big categories that my assessment has picked up with my understanding. And I don't know if you guys have ever done that, is where you bring these important elements and root cause together, and then you want to show when you rate it through different perspectives, you can then look at the ones that are generally red, and you want to be able to deal with that as quickly as possible. And the ones that are generally green, you can wait for that, and you don't have to address it immediately. Any comments or responses to that?
I'm looking for the category of information asset management and why it's not included in the graphs. Was that because it was the really high numbers?
Yeah, Debs, remember I shared that I mean, that's the root cause, and it would be nice to be able to have just present a single KPI within your organization, and that KPI is improperly managed assets. But because it's so big, it tends to make the others invisible. You know, it distorts the graph. It's a little bit like this risk ratings doing at the moment. The numbers are too big to get a good sense of the underlying problems.
I see. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Okay, so then this is another area that I make use of. It's helpful to understand where you should focus. Yeah, Mark, if you use a logarithmic scale, you can reduce that impact. Certainly, you can look at that. Okay, so this urgency importance matrix, what I like to put here is to say what is urgent what is important but not urgent, and we can get involved in planning for that. What is not urgent and not important, they are distractors, just you can ignore them for now. What is urgent but not important, these are things that are going to interrupt, right? So urgent but not important activities are things that sap your time and energy without contributing to longer term benefits. So if we've got these guys in here, we've got to get rid of them, and we've got to deal with them as quickly as possible. And then those that are urgent and important, that's when you're in crisis stage. Okay, so helpful to be able to take these causes and put them into the different matrices or different areas, and then you can assess your combined or your importance matrix like this. Now, what you don't want to see is everything is in crisis mode. Okay, that's really problematic, is when everything's been allocated into crisis. And you will certainly have to take another look at it and then almost have a level of important and urgent, right? And then try to get them more, distribute them into not urgent but important, and not urgent and not important. Now, those are, as we say, distractors, and this is just a graph that you want to prepare. All right. Any observations, Paul? You see, you doing. Have you ever used something like this before?
Yes, but I haven't seen the plans crisis, distraction, interruption. I haven't heard it referred to it that way. It's pretty cool.
Right. This one over here. So so I think it's a really simple way or a high level way of engaging with your execs in terms of saying, guys, this is what we need and we believe our focus should be, and this is how it maps onto that. Now, if I had a little bit more time in terms of Power BI, I could. What you can do is you can use this and then just plot the numbers within here. So you can use this background, you can use that matrix, and then you can just plot the causes that are sitting in these different quadrants.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, Connie, and I suppose this is the hard thing, and I'd love to see how you guys have scored your own organization. Mark, maybe you've done that and you feel that everything is important and urgent. I think he's causing depression. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so it's really important to communicate this, whether you're focusing on metadata, whether you're focusing on the entire data management, I don't think it matters. You can take each knowledge area at a time and review that one on its own, and then just have an explanation of the involvement that it has. All right, so then what I did was just to stay consistent with the with the other sessions and keep providing you with a clean deck, with a consistent deck. These are the areas that a metadata executive needs to focus on. What is the awareness, your leadership, your instrumentation, or the instruments that you're using, the governance, and then the justification. And you will determine, you will see from your graphs what is the most important. Okay, so what I liked about this is when I took all of those things and I put them into these different boxes, it was a lot simpler than the other ones, and that's important because you're talking about the execs, and it is interesting down the bottom here is when you take the outcomes or the impacts of poorly information asset management, you desperately want to achieve an organization that has the ability to respond and is flexible. Okay. So alacrity, I believe, is one of the most important reasons why we build the metadata, and that supports that. So the metadata is giving you the context, the metadata is describing the relationships, metadata is explaining to you the use of the data and the impact analysis. And I don't think there's anything more of all of the other knowledge areas that affect this outcome as much as metadata. What is important? The cost, the increased cost, and the decreased revenue. Who is the result here is the customer experience, and then when do we do it in terms of the productivity and the life cycle on our SDLC? Those are the areas that we need to focus on. We've got to bring in the measurement. This lack of measurement, we've got to deal with it. We can't be asking the question of who needs education. It's an interesting example. One of the state companies that within South Africa, they are battling with just being able to describe how educated their workforce is. There are questions on how badly educated they are, and people have made assumptions that only 30% or 33% of the employees have tertiary education, and now they're doing a job to try to work out what the exact numbers are. And they probably have less numbers than what the journalist had that published it. So it's rather embarrassing. So pay attention to this and see what you can get out of your metadata and making use of it. This was a mind map that I've put together in terms of working and helping me describe business alignment for the execs. It is those things about mission, vision, values, goals, objectives, and strategy. So I do have a different Visio diagram or a mind map that brings all these together, and it's helpful when you're describing the metadata business alignment. This is a template that you can use to evaluate that. All right. That's it for today, and that's it for metadata. Are there any questions or any comments?
Howard, I'm not sure. I didn't join the previous session, but did you guys perhaps touch on the value of a canonical data model? Because that's actually where you actually see explicitly, the data coming into action.
Yeah, it's a good question. The canonical data model is almost what we refer to as the unified model, the unified meta model, where it brings the metadata together and brings all the models. What we refer to, Michelle, is that data models are a form of metadata. They're critical in our repository, our metadata repository. And so a canonical model is a type of data model, but it's very similar to what we described as a unified meta model.
Correct, I agree.
Yeah. So it's the one that it almost has. It's a model of all the models of the application. So it tells you how to conform all the data, which is what people. It's actually a great example of a unified meta model. I'm glad you mentioned it. I forgot all about it, but a very helpful unified meta model. Who was talking about that? Was that you, Mark?
It's something I'm keen to try and produce. I think I could have more impact. I think I could make an impact on my client if I could figure out how to do it. It's just the enormity of the task, and to try and do it as a part-time, because that's not my assignment at work, if you will. Right?
Yeah.
But there's no one assigned to it. There's no information architect, and we need one. So I'm trying to produce artifacts that cause leadership to figure out that they should give me that job and pay me even more money.
But have you heard of that idea of a canonical model?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, especially in the enterprise architecture systems integration space.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah, that is certainly one of the things. If you wanted to, when they talk about microservices, and that's one of the approaches that they use on a microservice, is to build a canonical model, and then everyone communicates according to the canonical model. Yeah. ISO 11179, John, my understanding is that's more around naming conventions.
Yeah.
And it's a metadata standard for naming. It doesn't really bring about a model of all models. Is that, John, have I answered your question properly?
Hi, this is John.
Yeah.
I always thought it was the model of a model, right? That you pull in. I didn't realize it was for naming standards. I thought it was that Canonical itself.
My understanding of my use, and I use ISO 11179 for when one wants to develop naming standards of entities and conditions. That's how I've used it.
Is that a part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
There's 5 parts. There's 5 parts, so it's actually quite an involved standard. But certainly within the DMBOK, it refers to the ISO 11179 when you get involved with building a business glossary, whenever you're creating definitions for concepts and things like that, you use the ISO 11179.
There is reference to Part 7 created in 2019 as a meta model for data set registration.
Data set registration, yeah. So it's got some of them, but it's not my understanding of the canonical model.
Ah. Well,
So,
yeah, that answers it.
Yeah. So then what we will be doing, guys, is when we post on the LinkedIn the recording, Debbie will share all the recording of the sessions as well. The URL that I put there, that's got the presentation for everybody, and Debbie will share that as well on that center. John, I'm not sure if I answered your question properly.
Yeah, it just was kind of a shock, right? So, but yeah, I want to go look at it again because I saw they had UMLs in there and how you related top concept.
That's right. They actually described the model for a taxonomy and vocabularies. So it's around the controlled vocabulary. That's my understanding, and a thesaurus and things like that. I've looked at that model and I've used it very effectively.
The one thing that was confusing on it, glad to hear that. The one thing that was confusing on it when they draw the UML, they only give you like 2 or 3 column names, but that doesn't answer my question of, do I create my own column names to expand it, or
no, it's very powerful. I'll send you a data model of it. We've used it when we wanted to ingest our business glossary, because what we did with the business glossary, we had all of those associations. So ISA has associated with, and then we had the context of a controlled vocabulary. So we built vocabularies by department, and so we had these sub-controlled vocabularies, and then we aggregated them, and then the ability to search. So I really enjoyed that. I'm sure I've got a presentation somewhere around, and I'll share it with you.
I would love to see that. Yes, because I was going to play with that, but then I'm like, well, I don't know what else fields I should put in on these, on the UML.
It's pretty comprehensive. So I find it really, you don't need to add much more on it.
Ah, okay. Well, that's good to know. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, we used it extensively. We had to build a. We were fortunate and unfortunate where the execs didn't believe in spending money on data management. So a lot of the times we had to build our own Excel versions and then bring Excel, go and send it out, and then bring the data back into a SQL database and things like that. So you certainly learned a lot from and got a lot from things like ISO 11179.
Aha. And so, like you said, it's, I got this department, this department. They have two terms, but they mean the same thing. So in that 1179, you could then say, I guess, either define one term or at least show the relationship.
Yeah, and you can define hierarchies. So you've got groups and then contexts that they're used in and stuff like that. So I don't know if you've seen some of Steve Hoberman's work that he does in terms of defining context collisions. When you have a term collision, how do you resolve it by the four areas, the consensus diamond. And so you can bring that in, and then you can have a preferred term, and you can have other terms and things. All your synonyms and things like that also come into that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I saw him speak. I just looked him up. I was like, oh, I already knew him.
Yeah.
So I've seen him speak before.
Yeah, he's got some fantastic data modeling stuff. Any other questions? Anybody did anyone do the exercise and see what they came up with? Mark, I'm still waiting for you to overcome your depression and show me an image.
Yeah, I was trying to pay attention, so I didn't walk through it.
All right.
But I will commit to doing it from my perspective, month 3 in with this client.
Yeah.
And sharing that with you only.
Okay. All right. Fine.
Sensitive.
Yeah. I was thinking it would actually be quite nice to put onto LinkedIn, and we can just show some images. But you can have a makeup one there, and we can have.
Or I'll have to invent a code name for the client.
Yeah. ABC.
Acme Widgets Company.
That's right. That's correct. Anyone else? Paul Grubler, any comments from you?
No, I need to do that spreadsheet as well for Data Gambit, I realized, but
yeah.
I'm not sure if I want to.
But look, you can always get better. I mean, the nice thing about starting at the bottom is getting better.
Yes, that's quite true.
Yeah. Any other comments?
Just a question. Hello.
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
No, I'm battling to hear you. Sorry.
I mean, you hear that the data model is in the past, right? So, do you really see like a unified the importance of the unified data model, since we have data cataloging tools?
Yeah, this is.
Which you can.
You've raised a great point, and we're actually going to have some discussions on our data privacy scenario where customers are using different tools to bring together data privacy information that they've collected. So data catalog is one of them. Another one is a ROPA, which is your registry of processing activities. And these two different metadata datasets live in different databases, and they were unable to link the two together. So what one of the suggestions is to be able to do different extracts from the different tools, build a unified data model that would bring that together, and then join it up in a database of your choosing, link the two together, and then do further analysis that way. So I do find that.
Wat het jy gekoop by DF onlangs? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Paul. Does that sort of answer your question? So what we are finding is that unless you've got a tool, for example, like Informatica, that does everything for you, but then you have to have everything in there. then your ability to link the different elements together is quite restrictive. So an example of, let's say you've got Informatica and it does 5 things, and then you've got 2 other tools doing 2 other things. How do you bring all that data together? Because there's certainly associations and links between those different metadata elements, right?
Yeah.
And that's where your unified meta model will come in, when you're actually building those relationships and sending the context and setting the context and relationship between these elements. So if you want to do a true impact analysis of what happens if the business changes here, then you want to be able to bring all of these into consideration before you make the change.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, I think a conversation like this is like normally, you know, when you speak to customers, especially big ones, and it's about getting locked into a vendor and things like that. For conversations like this, there's actually some pros into making sure that the ecosystem that you decide on can bring you a lot of benefit. Because it's like you said earlier, how to manage certain components in one software package and other ones in another, it complicates your world very quickly, right?
Yeah. Look, I mean, there's always these different arguments, and I think it can get quite religious in terms of best of breed, or, you know, sort of, do I go and buy the best tool per area and then I bring it together, or do I get one tool? And so there are different options in that approach. John,
yes, sir. Because just today I actually have a demo with my boss for Top Quadrant.
Yeah.
And he was saying to me just the other day, well, I can do so many things in Informatica, and, you know, I'm not the salesman here, right? But I'm like, yeah, but can I link that data? Can I also make the definition like I can in Top Quadrant, and then have that link to those metadata of it that you could do in Informatica, right?
Yeah.
And you can't, and how important that is that to him might not be. And so, but again, he's saying he could do everything, but you just pointed out to me that, well, you still have to do these other things, and you still need to link the data so that it's searchable, because Informatica is not accessible to the business.
Correct.
So what good is that doing them, especially if there's not even definitions around it?
Yeah, so, and I must admit, I've had some involvement with Informatica, but what I have found out is that a lot of the companies in South Africa have brought in OneTrust for data privacy, and a few of those customers are Informatica customers, and they're battling to join the data together between these 2 elements, and that's where your whole, you start to creak, and then you get into the debate of, well, then because I've got Informatica, must everything be in Informatica? And I liked your answer there. As a case of some things you just can't do. And I do find Top Quadrant to be really powerful in that that relationship definition and management from a knowledge point of view, and a taxonomy and an ontology development. I'm speaking out of turn because I don't really know about Informatica, but the challenges are that when I can't get the data and I can't get the way I need to do it, then what do? And I suppose it's
right, but Informatica only works for Informatica because we're in Snowflake and we're using Data Stage. So Informatica can't really talk to Data Stage, right, and say, give me your metadata.
Well, it's actually fascinating because, and I think Carl's just put something on there, is you do have these metadata crawlers that are able to extract the metadata from these different tools, and a lot of these tools support a standard of metadata extraction that you can then query that tool and get the metadata from it, and then you build a unified model in that repository. So I know Calibra did a lot of that when it tried to present that governance. It had the abilities to connect to multiple tools to be able to extract the metadata from these different tools and present your list of assets from a discovery tool and stuff like that. So I do find that these tools are becoming more cooperative and being able to share the data in sharing the metadata. Coral, is that sort of what you were saying as well?
Yes, Howard. So the two approaches that I've seen was there's a meta model bus. I'm trying to think. There's a German company, but we're talking, a serious, expensive product that uses the enterprise service bus kind of approach between modeling tools, but we're talking big money. And then the other one is that open services lifecycle collaboration. That's almost like while you're working in one tool, it's calling out to the other tool. So it's not about sort of exchanging information, or it's about almost a services kind of approach, API kind of approach, where the tools can delegate work and call on each other. I don't know what the uptake beyond the sort of IBM family of. Remember, they acquired so many different products from different vendors that they all put under the Rational banner. So I think they had no choice other than to come up with the standards for not to confuse the market with what they're selling, to say that, look, all these things can talk to each other.
Right. Yeah, and so that whole thing of building a centralized repository that you can then query these different tools, bring it together in an area, and then build a unified model that relates them together and then allows users to annotate and add their collaboration to it. I think that's an important aspect.
John, I'm wondering what you made some mention of some Informatica tools you're using at the moment. What is it?
Right. It's not actually me. This was my boss saying he's done this in the past. So it was in a chat, and that's what he had said. But in my mind, I'm like, well, I know Informatica. I've helped reverse engineer it, right? So that's the only perspective I really have. But I guess my guess is that, is it available to the business? Can the business log in somewhere, see the metadata and understand it? But again, as I pointed out earlier, how does that support definitions so that the business can understand what they're looking at? Because again, the IT and business are so disconnected. So if they're looking at that, they aren't going to understand a thing.
And just before we go too much on the product, I've certainly seen Ab Initio, and they got something called Metadata Hub, that all of the ETL data and they use quality and business rules going to Metadata Hub. But then when we try to interrogate it and present it at a business level, we found it almost impossible. Now, this was, granted, this was 6-7 years ago, but it was just about impossible dumbing that down for the right level of business user. It was good for the engineers, the data engineers that were moving data. They got a real good information. Now, I certainly know that Informatica has Axon and things like that have the glossaries, have those things, link it to the assets. So I do believe that functionality is available. Paul?
Yes, and I think they've actually done quite a lot in the last year or 2 or 3. I think since GDPR came along, there's a lot of push just to get the data governance tools a lot more business friendly. Axon I've used, and it is a business interface tool that I can certainly say.
They actually bought it from. It was a standalone company, and Informatica bought Axon and integrated it within their platform. So Axon was one of those tools that had nothing, almost had no data other than it was a bit like Calibra, and then they were so dependent on being able to work with different metadata repositories. So they specialized in that, and they were able to extract the data.
Yeah, and it works quite well with John. Your manager might have thought about EDC, which is more the data dictionary side, more the technical side of the product suite. And as Howard said, since Axon's come on board, they share a lot of content underneath the hood, but it's it's certainly Axon is definitely a business focus. The things that you define there are business terms, even policies and your regulations. You can link to that, processes, and you can also go to the data. But I've recently come into contact with OneTrust as well, and what I found, which is sort of common around these tools, is they certainly became better at becoming more friendly and so on, but you still can't, if you want to crunch it and aggregate the data and try to get some insights from it. I'm thinking about OneTrust. OneTrust was used by a client of mine for a survey, for privacy surveys. It's good for that. But they got all the answers back from all the participants, but now it's in the tool itself, or maybe not the version that I have, whatever, couldn't really aggregate that data and put visuals on it to get insights from it. And you can't also get the data out of it easily to put into a Power BI or a Click or something. So I think what is common, you get the tools that's getting better at managing the relationships under the hood between the concepts, a business term to a field, to a data set, to a process, whatever. But to get some good sort of aggregated visualizations on it is still not the easiest thing to do.
See, now that's where I think Top Quadrant can do that, because they've got Shackle, right? The SQL-like query.
And Sparkle, Shackle
Sparkle.
and Sparkle.
That's it.
Yeah.
Sparkle. It's like a SQL language where you could aggregate.
Yeah. And that's what those open data platforms are doing with that, Coral. That may be interest of you, that DCAT, the DCAT API standard. And they're using metadata trawlers to then consolidate metadata about every country's open data sets and the context on that. So yes, there's that combination of how things are put together.
But those crawls are getting really, really good. It's not only databases, but ETL tools, file systems, cloud services.
Yeah.
It's really getting quite advanced.
Yeah. But I mean, that's another discussion. For example, when you go into the Azure platform, all of that metadata and all the data movement and all the data orchestration, all of that stuff's coming together. And I was involved right in the beginning when they tried to put a project together about a data catalog. I forget the project name, but that was quite exciting, where it could read in Excel data sets, it could read in your databases, and then we'll bring all of that stuff together. And now they're doing it with all the ETL. So I think your cloud platforms are getting a lot of that metadata together, especially with reading of logs and things like that, to automate the operational metadata as well.
And yeah, my boss said that Snowflake's coming out with that, but that you can throw tags on it. But tags to me, right, is folksonomy is something that's agreed upon by mass people, but tags are, this is what it means to me. So how am I going to govern that? What is that good mean? But I think it's good that they're coming out with that. But again, I still want to pull that in from all the other things.
Yeah, agreed. That's I think that's the right approach. It's going to take a while for that proper taxonomy / ontology to be integrated into that process. Very similar to, I think, with SharePoint. It started with a taxonomy, but I don't think they've progressed far enough.
Who did? Sorry?
SharePoint. SharePoint.
Oh.
And I think there's a guy, I forget his name, Ross, who claims to have the widest set of controlled vocabularies or taxonomies in the world. He publishes a lot of his taxonomies into SharePoint, allowing people to use those tags to tag their datasets.
Huh. So that one thing I'm learning is taxonomy. I really feel like there's a little bit of difference as I'm learning here between, the UX taxonomy, UX, the letter X, right? For design.
Yeah.
For surfing web, right? Searching the SharePoint. it's really it's hierarchical, it's generic in naming, whereas with business terms, and this is what I learned with Ronald Ross and his stuff.
Yeah, he's the guy. He's the guy I was
Right.
talking about, Ronald Ross. Yeah.
Okay. And in his book, when you're defining terms, you're inadvertently building that taxonomy.
Yes. Yes.
But it's business term taxonomical, I guess we could say.
Yes. Yes.
So that's where I see this difference in these two, and making out, and I split taxonomies to say this one's really more, searchable, I guess, content wise for searching a SharePoint or a web, but it's not really business taxonomy, if you will, because of the term definitions you give to those categories and so forth.
So Ronald Ross actually imports a lot of his taxonomies into SharePoint. So he's got a SharePoint adapter where the taxonomies he's developed are then loaded into SharePoint.
I'll have to look for that because he didn't mention that in his books or his SBR, his company website.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work
and then
there.
There's another author, Harst.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Why don't you put it in the chat? I'd love to read up.
On Ross or Harst?
I haven't heard. I've heard of Ross. So I've chatted to him a few times on all these different taxonomies. The only challenge I had with Ross's stuff was that it never developed into an ontology. So it was taxonomies, but they were hierarchical and not the multifaceted side of it I couldn't find it. There were lots of taxonomies on different areas, but the multifaceted part in terms of the interrelationships were not defined, which is where you start moving into an ontology.
Right. And I get, because he gives names to everything. So I guess where you're saying you couldn't see, I guess, like a technical asset couldn't be related to one of his taxonomies, or
no, so his taxonomies were great for a certain domain, and they had the breakdown and categorization. Now, when we had a concept that straddled multiple domains that had multiple inheritance, in some cases the relationships between the domains weren't defined.
Oh, but now could you define that?
Yeah. That's what an ontology does. So an ontology has both the hierarchical structure and the cross relationship structure or associations.
Right, and that's what I'm interested in. That's what I want to get into.
Yeah, an ontology helps you with that.
Right. Huh. So I guess I see that. I guess I'm seeing that as no different than, when we first started talking, you said LOB, right, line of business, this domain has their terms and this domain has their terms, and bring them together in a canonical model.
That's exactly, yeah.
So that's how I see Ross, right? It's just he's got one domain over here, another domain over here. Let's build this canonical model to relate those, because we've got because what I like is he takes verb concepts and converts them to a noun. And then I don't know if you've heard of Dan Lindstedt and Data Vault 2.0.
Yeah.
Right? Those verb concepts converted to a noun are my links.
Yeah. The verb is your relationship between them. Yeah.
Right. So if we can define a verb concept, then we can define that relationship between domains, right?
Yes, you can. And the ISO 11179 has those link entities within it. Now, if Ross is taking it up into a canonical model where that association has been done, then that's more in terms of a multifaceted taxonomy / an ontology.
Right. And I don't know that, right?
I wasn't aware that he did that, because I actually approached him looking for a series of taxonomies with respect to financial regulations. And for example, BCBS 239, and I think I approached him about a year ago, and he didn't have anything at that point in time. So,
and I guess, I understand the reusability, but are these standard taxonomies out there, and this is where I think I like Ross, is that again, folksonomy.
Yeah.
My business is not going to use those defined taxonomies. They're going to create their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I like with Ross, is that it allows me to speak the language of business, what they means to them, despite these standardized taxonomies, which are great. But is that really defining the business?
I think what you, and it's, I think you, John, you're in a similar situation to that of an enterprise data model, where a reference model from an industry reference model. It certainly gives you the right level of abstraction that you need to map the business language to. So you should never just take the reference model and force it on the business and tell them to eat it up. It doesn't work, and I don't think it's good for the business. But what it does do is it gives me almost that canonical model that I can map the business stuff onto that. And when I'm battling to find something within that, then I can ask the business questions. Well, how does this actually work? And how do we get that? So it allows a sort of top down and bottom up, which is actually part of the discussion we're having on Monday with Marco about how do we get these facts? How do we define them? So that ORM modeling is also the idea of modeling the verbs between the nouns and stuff like that. So you reifying the verbs. They're not just a foreign key. There's actually entities that describe that verb.
Wow. And is this a call you're doing on Monday, or is this just a
Yeah,
business
this
call?
it's a call on Monday. It's the ins and outs of data modeling.
Hopefully I'm on it.
Yeah, that would be great to see you.
Yeah, I would love that. It's on your, but it's in relation to this, right?
It's more from a data modeling point of view, but they're all linked together, right? So
Okay.
a data model is a great form to create the business glossary, which is it's also good when you take ontologies and you derive the appropriate glossaries and models from that, like you go from FIBO to FibDM. So there's that transition and translation that you get involved with. But I really find the ontology is very close to a knowledge graph, which is what you're getting from top quadrant.
Yeah.
And you now can navigate the space of all of these different nouns that have been loaded in with verb relationships and links.
Right. Yes. And that's what I want to take with and go, to the data lake and build out Data Vault, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because it represents that business.
Yeah.
Nice.
And if you look at, there was I'll send you the link. I'll look for that link where people use knowledge data or graph databases to do the concept modeling. So, and we'll talk a little bit about it, where they bring the nouns in, they ingest the data from your data lake. You then start to look at the relationships between these elements that come from the data in the data lake. And then you start to do your normalization and abstraction and that on those graph entities, and you start typing on top of that. Now that's where you then go to a knowledge graph that is sort of embedded in what top quadrant does, and your ability to then filter all the data that you're getting to hone in on what I need.
Wow, that sounds cool.
Yeah. So I'll actually send it to you. I'll send you the learning that I did. I did a course on that with.
Love it.
I'll send you that course. That was really exciting, understanding that transition from a graph database to a knowledge graph to an ontology to your typing, and then that's when you start getting what top quadrant is really dealing with is that ability to use the metadata and the data together.
Right. Oh wow. Getting excited.
Yeah, that's I think is where a lot of the value is coming in now with this metadata. It's getting so powerful in what it can do for you and your ability to bring data together and unify data and metadata.
Yeah, and I'm actually, I've been 20 years in the IT industry, but I graduated with my bachelor's at the end of July with library science degree, and I've already been accepted to
All
Kent State
right.
University for a master's in library science, which was focused on taxonomy, ontology,
Yes,
semantic
yeah,
analysis, and right. I'm blending the worlds, man. I'm going to be a data lake librarian.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you talk like that, because we had a relationship with a lady in Ireland who got a doctorate in language, and she was operating as a barista when one of the data management people that I know met her, and she's been doing some amazing language work with controlled vocabularies and stuff like that.
Oh my goodness! Wow, I'm jealous.
Yeah, I'll share. It's Catherine O'Keefe.
I'm gonna go search her in LinkedIn. Catherine.
I'll just double check that. Maybe Veronica's on the line, but it's Darren O'Brien and Catherine O'Keefe. Yeah.
Yes, I
Catherine
think you're
has
right.
her doctorate in languages.
I think she was a Catherine with a K.
Yeah.
And is it RYN or because I see a bunch of Catherine links in?
It's RIN, I think.
Yeah, I'm getting the book, Howard.
Okay.
Oh, sweet. Oh, look, man's got the book. I love it.
I have the book. I can't see it now. It's not jumping out at me.
Let me go to Kindle. It's a lot easier.
And who's Catherine O'Keefe?
But this book sucks on Kindle because of its formatting.
Yeah. You're right.
This I bought on Kobo and then had to buy the physical book too. So that was a waste of money. It's right here. It's driving me nuts. It's right here.
Is she in Castlebridge, Ireland?
Yes, that's right. Dara O'Brien. They wrote the book on ethics, ethical enterprise information management, E2IM. Yeah.
No way. Wow. Oh, there it is. Wow, Doctor of Philosophy. And she wrote book. I'm gonna see. She's not promoting her book on her LinkedIn.
No. All right, guys.
Yeah, I've been stealing the show. I'm sorry. That's
No problem.
man.
The host actually left. Paul had to go, so I think I'm the host at the moment. But guys, it's any other questions? Otherwise, we can.
No, thanks again, Howard. I posted some ideas for future sessions in the chat window.
Yeah, I did see them. I need to go over them again.
Yeah, and I'll send you an architecture slide I'm working on with my client, and I'll buy you a dinner for your comments.
Oh yeah, sure.
All right.
Or something. Somehow I'll find a way to compensate you.
Yeah, no problem. At this stage,
and Howard, I'd love to see those links if you could send me those. I would really appreciate that.
I'll do that. Thanks a lot.
Yes, y'all have a great 4th.
Excellent. Thanks, man. Yeah, shucks. It's July the 4th is coming up, eh? When is it? Sunday?
I think Sunday, yeah.
Yeah. Mabella? Agnes, sorry.
Can you explain taxonomy in lame English?
Yes. So taxonomy is really just a categorization. It's a categorization of information. So the most simplistic categorization is that of almost the animal species, and they talk about just the different like a vertebra and all the different fish and things like that. So it allows you to structure information and you have different types of taxonomies. You have a folksonomy, which is a type of taxonomy, and they're all and that's just about colloquial terms and terms that the business use. You have taxonomies that define structures of data, and it's a way of grouping and classifying the data that you have for a specific subject area.
Oh, okay.
So if you think of Homo sapien and all those different Homo habilis and Homo Neanderthal man, those type of things, it's that structure that people have defined to categorize our development and things like that.
Okay.
So if you, in our top quadrant's got this amazing way of, if you look at all the reference data and the drop downs that you have, for example, a customer state, what are the elements that make up a customer state? And these customer states can be recursive. So you can have, for example, in active, you could have another level underneath that. So you could have prospect, suspect, or suspect, prospect, customer, and then within customer, you can have a sub-level there. That tree structure that you're seeing there is a taxonomy.
Oh, okay. All right. Then.
And some people refer to it as like an ISA hierarchy. So a credit card is a product. And so it models, taxonomies do very well at modeling hierarchical structures and elements that have in there, but it also goes, there's something else called a multifaceted taxonomy where, for example, you can describe all the components of a PC that are in there. So you could have like it's a BMW, and within the BMW, it's got these 5 models or 6 models of cars, and then it's made up of these air conditioning systems. So all of those relationships you can use a taxonomy to describe that.
Okay. I wanted to be clear.
No, it's a great question. I mean, it's helpful that we understand how to make use of taxonomies and how to describe our data with taxonomies.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Patrick, I see.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I hopped on a bit late. A quick follow-up on your conversation on taxonomy. For example, I come from spatial sciences background. It's commonly known as GIS.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. As far as metadata is concerned, in terms of standards, we have a number of standards defined by the Spatial Data Infrastructure in South Africa.
Right.
So in different environments, again, as far as taxonomy is concerned, they would call things like themes, like status A. They would create themes to organize the different spatial data sets across the country.
Yes.
Where you'd have your administrative boundaries, which would be, for example, South Africa, provincial, local municipality, and the likes. Then you have your demographic type of data.
That's right.
Your infrastructure planning type of data. So I'm just trying to see if maybe it's within the same conversation there.
So you've certainly, let's separate the two. You've actually got your almost a taxonomy that describes the structure. So if we take that out in terms of a planet and then Earth, and then within Earth it's got the continents, and within the continents have got the countries, and countries have got divisions and subdivisions. That's your metadata, or the way in which the layers of the information are described. And then you'll have your actual data. For example, Gauteng is a province. So it's that where you associate Gauteng, Western Cape, all of those get associated with the label of province. And that hierarchical structure that almost takes you from a street address or a building or a room number within a street address and things like that, that's your hierarchical taxonomy that describes your data sets and the different layers within GIS.
It makes sense.
But that's a wonderful example of a taxonomy and how they relate to each other. And the GIS are very good at that, is that you can then overlay that, for example, with restaurants and shopping shops, and then all of those different types of layers have a metadata structure to them that allows people to navigate and associate the information that they're looking for.
Yes. And then, like some of these GIS technologies, like for example, Access Pro has these metadata standards built in it. So you somewhat like chooses a metadata standard, then it helps you with the documentation. If you were to share the same data with the next colleague, it kind of helps them understand the data lineage.
Yes, and that's why it's so important that this metadata goes with the data set and not just the data set on its own.
Perfect. Thank you.
These days, when we build these data sets, we've got to pay a lot of attention to the metadata that helps us interpret data sets and understand the context in which they're used.
Understandable.
Because I found, I mean, the GIS is a very interesting one because you can, I've actually found in some scenarios, and I can't remember where it was, but they had a name of a town which was exactly the same as a province. And then when you look at this and say, well, what am I dealing with? Am I dealing with a province or am I dealing with a town?
It makes sense. Yeah, of course, there's a lot of work which can go in terms of fixing those. We do have good standards, as you've mentioned.
Yeah.
I think we do have the geographical standards in the country.
Yes.
So
Worldwide.
so if everyone follows those standards, and when they're especially data custodians, it kind of helps eliminate all those type of problems. Because ideally, it should not be there.
Yeah, agreed. That's why we want to stick to a standard, stick to the same way of building a controlled vocabulary, get standards that we use to define terms and things like that.
Perfect.
Any other questions? It's great. Guys, thank you very much. We're approaching the 2-hour mark. I really appreciate it. John, thanks for all your materials that you've added. I'll certainly try to share the ones that I got. Thank you very much for your interaction. It's been great.
All righty. Thank y'all so very much.
Wonderful. We look forward to seeing you.
All right. I can't wait.
Thanks.
Thanks for a nice session.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Bye.
Hans.
Thank you, and keep well, keep safe.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.